Record of Fugitives, November 1855. From the papers of Sidney Howard Gay. Read by Frank Blissett. November 6th. Littleton Suele, alias Johnson, belonged to N.M. Martin of Richmond, Virginia, left on the 1st, concealed on board a steamboat by the steward, to whom he paid $60, all he had, to the aid. Had been threatened with punishment by his master, for being out a half-hour beyond the time permitted by his pass. Concluded to go where passes were not needed to be out o' nights. $4.50. November 10th. Harriet Shepherd, with her 5 children, the youngest about 3 years of age, the oldest about 17, all slaves of John Dwyer, living near Chestertown, Maryland, with her brothers and 2 other colored men, borrowed 2 carriages and a pair of horses to each of their respective masters, and started on the night of October 26th for a free country, and arrived at 9 o'clock the next morning at Wilmington, Delaware, and tied up the horses at a store door, went in and bought some cakes. Leaving the store, they loitered about for a while till they met a colored man, whom they asked to direct them to a Quaker, and who took them to Thomas Garrett. Garrett himself had seen them in the street. Expenses, $18.50. November 17th. Katherine Pits, alias Nickerson, of Berlin, Maryland, arrived from Philadelphia with 1 child, an infant in arms. Her master, John Pitts, a preacher and doctor, was, she understood, about to sell her, and her husband and brother advised her, she says, to cut sticks. Her husband took them in a wagon to Baltimore Hundred, Delaware. Thence she walked some distance, and finally got to Philadelphia by steamboat. She was a house servant and born in the family. Expects her husband and brother to follow her with a child she left behind. Sent to Syracuse. November 19th. Isaac Jacobs, alias Charles Handy, belonged to Henry Tilcher, near Berlin, Maryland. His wife left last spring, and he seemed much dejected at hearing nothing of her along the route. She went by the name of Leah Davis, and they left behind them 5 head of children. Oliver Paul, slave of Moses Paul, was with Isaac. They both know Katherine Pits, and according to their account, she left home some time earlier than she represented. Sent them all to Syracuse together. $11. November 23rd. Daniel Carr arrived from Plymouth, North Carolina. His master, John C. McBoyle, sent him to Jacob Williams of Portsmouth, a speculator for whom he was carriage driver. This man would not let him visit his wife and children, who lived near Norfolk, slaves of Francis Hubbard, and he ran away in June 52 and was concealed on board the steamboat Stag by the captain. The captain had a pass written, which the clerk of the boat did not, when it was shown to him, consider as sufficient. So he was put in irons, returned to Portsmouth. After being imprisoned 2 days and nights, he was punished with 40 lashes and released by his master. In the fall he started again, but was soon arrested as a fugitive. On paying of $2 he was released and sent back to Portsmouth, but his absence had not been discovered. The last time he left he was more successful. The captain of a schooner advised him to leave and conceal himself in a certain swamp nearby, where he would take him at a certain time in his vessel as he passed. It happened, however, that the vessel had to be laid up for repairs, so that Daniel was compelled to remain in his den for 3 months, no opportunity offering for him to escape. At length the vessel appeared, and the captain took him on board and concealed him for 17 days. He put into Norfolk, and there completed his cargo by the addition of 20 more fugitives, men and women, all of whom he safely delivered at Wilmington. Daniel left a wife and 3 children behind him. Allen Tatum was of the same company, and came from Wilmington with Daniel. He was from Norfolk, where he belonged to a widow by the name of Lovey White, but worked for her son, John R. White, a shingle merchant. He hired his time of his mistress for $120 per annum, and had beside to take care of himself. Was never married, but has 1 child. Left behind 3 sisters and a brother, 2 of whom mean to follow his example as soon as possible. Thomas Nickerson, of the same company, belonged to P.T. Bockhaven, was hired out, and allowed $1.50 for his own subsistence, clothing, etc., the rest of his wages going to support his master. During the fever, his master took him to Ocean View, and promised to let him keep all he could earn. Worked at whitewashing and woodcutting, and for the latter received a check for $5, which he gave to his master to collect for him. But the master kept it, and the man who had submitted to be robbed all his life was so outraged at this petty larceny that he ran away. All 3 of these men were sent on to Syracuse on their way to Canada. The rest of their company had dispersed themselves in various directions, some, it is said, having passed through this city within a few days. Expenses, $11.64. November 30th. Phyllis Galt arrived from Philadelphia. She was one of the company of 21 to which the 3 last belonged. Her husband died of yellow fever the last summer, but for that, she says, she does not know that she would ever have had the courage to run away. Her master and mistress, Mr. and Mrs. John Francis, left her alone in Norfolk when the sickness commenced, her owner, a Mrs. Alcher of Baltimore, promising to send for her. Phyllis thinks she did not because she was afraid she would run away. Her old master, Mr. Francis, left a large number of slaves at his death, all of whom were sold to pay his debts, and Phyllis among the rest, who was bought by his recent mistress, Mrs. Alcher. To Mrs. Francis, the daughter of her late mistress, she seems much attached. Says she would have remained with her had she belonged to her, as they were brought up together. Sent her to Boston, where she has friends. Expenses, $3. That was Record of Fugitives, November 1855. From the papers of Sidney Howard Gay. Read by Frank Blissett.